Okay guys, this is video 2 for the review. This is about the Industrial Revolution, which includes huge immigration, lots of growth in American businesses, but lots of problems in cities, especially for immigrants. And then we're going to talk about robber barons and captains of industry and all that. Basically, America grows in a huge way in the Industrial Revolution. So let's first talk about immigration. So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, many people came to America. For many reasons. Maybe they wanted to have a better way of life. Maybe they wanted to escape famine at home. So you had European immigrants who came to Ellis Island, and you remember that because of the E and the E. Most of them came for jobs, and one of the things that happened to them at Ellis Island is as soon as they got off the boat, they were checked for medical issues. And if they were clear, they were allowed in. Within probably a day, sometimes hours, they were allowed in the United States. Asians, however, which include Chinese and Japanese and anybody from Asia, went through Angel Island in San Francisco. And remember, A for A. The difference was for Asians, because they didn't look like us, they didn't sound like us, they didn't have the same culture as us, they were often held for long periods of time. And the biggest reason they weren't let in immediately is because of nativism. We didn't like them because they weren't from here, they didn't look like us, sound like us, didn't speak English, and they were blamed for taking the jobs. And nativism is going to lead to something called the Chinese Exclusion Act. After the Transcontinental Railroad starts being built, a lot of Asians came over here and took these low-paying jobs. A lot of Americans who were here blamed the Chinese for taking those jobs. And the U.S. government banned all Chinese immigration for over 50 years. So it didn't end until like 1940-something. And also, if you were a Chinese person already here, and you'd been here for a few years, you were not allowed to become a citizen, okay? So immigrants need jobs to be successful. Many worked in factories in horrible conditions. So one of the things that made industry better was something called the Bessemer process. This is for steel, okay? Steel. We needed steel to build railroads, we needed steel to build trains, we needed steel to build everything, including skyscrapers. So the demand for steel was huge. And was a huge, there was a huge need for cheap steel. And so what a guy named Henry Bessemer did was he created a process that made steel cheaper. And the person who became the richest dude ever because of this process, his name was Andrew Carnegie, okay? And during this time of the Industrial Revolution, we have 4 huge guys that become super rich. I mean, millionaires, billionaires, back in the 1800s, early 1900s, okay? John D. Rockefeller, he was in charge of oil. His name of his company was Standard Oil. Then you had Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he basically was a monopolist, of the railroad company. And Andrew Carnegie, U.S. Steel, okay? J.P. Morgan did banks and consolidation. And these 4 guys were sometimes called robber barons, sometimes called captains of industry. Robber baron is a negative term that describes someone during the American Industrial Revolution who became rich through dishonest or ruthless means. They paid their people horrible wages. They made them work in horrible working conditions. They bought out companies so there was no competition. They had monopolies, okay? Every one of these guys had a monopoly at one point. Now, later on in their lives, a lot of them became what they call captain of industries, where they used their money that they received from their businesses to help spur growth of American businesses, help the economy, give back to charity, those kind of things. So a lot of people liked what they did for America. Those are the people who call them captains of industry. Some people thought they're just taking advantage of people, and they're really robber barons. For immigrants, it was tough. They had to work in horrible conditions, and they needed things. A lot of them didn't speak English. They didn't know where to go for help, and so people in America took advantage of this. And what came about were something called political machines. And what a political machine was, it's almost like a gang. It's not like a gang where they go shoot and kill people. It's like a political gang that works together to do you favors as an immigrant. Okay, yeah, I'll get you a job. I'll get you some basic services. In exchange, though, these political machines wanted votes. They wanted you to vote for the candidate they wanted. And when that candidate became elected, they controlled him or her, okay? So it's very much like The Godfather. And in this case, The Godfather is what they call the party boss. The real party boss of a political machine named Tammany Hall was a guy named William Boss Tweed. He does you a favor. He has people who do the dirty work. He has connections. He does you favors, but then he wants your vote. That's what he does, okay? The opposite of this is something called a settlement house, and that's something that helped people learn English and become used to American life and culture. They didn't want anything in return, but the party boss and the political machines did. They were very corrupt, stole millions of dollars from cities, okay? So because we have these problems and we have all these robber barons that are working immigrants to death, we need something that's going to help workers out. So we need to work together. Remember that picture that had the fist and it was people standing together and working towards a common good? Well, that's a labor union. The purpose of a labor union is to protect people from harsh working conditions. So in one situation, in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, 150 women and children died working in this sweatshop. The doors were locked. There were not enough exit. The fire escape collapsed. And so this is going to be sort of the catalyst that gets people thinking, man, we got to fix things for workers. And so you have the first couple labor unions come about. The first one's called the Knights of Labor. Its job was to try to help improve conditions. But the problem with the Knights of Labor was people didn't know what to fix first. They didn't know whether to fix wages or fix conditions or get rid of child labor. So it failed because they couldn't focus on what to fix. So the second and still the largest labor union in the United States, it's actually a labor organization, it's monstrous, came out because of the leadership of a guy named Samuel Gompers. It's called the American Federation of Labor, the AFL. It was very successful because it focused on simple things, very simple things. Improved pay, working conditions. They didn't try to fix everything at one time. They worked as a huge group, lots of people involved, and they were able to get those simple gains, okay? If you fast forward to 1955, they joined with another labor organization called the Congress of Industrial Organizations. The AFL joined with them to create the AFL-CIO, which is the largest federation, which is a huge group of unions in the United States. It has millions of members, which include people like firefighters and teachers and workers and nurses. So you know somebody who's in a union, and chances are they're in something that's in the AFL-CIO. Okay, here's some questions. Which statement about immigration to the United States during the 19th century is most valid? A, organized labor supported unlimited immigration. B, most immigrants to the United States were illegal aliens. C, industrial growth led to a demand for cheap immigrant labor. D, few immigrants came from Western Europe. Okay, the best answer is C. Because we were growing so much, there was a huge demand for cheap immigrant labor. Okay. Number 2, which expression most accurately illustrates the concept of nativism? A, help wanted and Irish need not apply. C, America first in war and peace. B, go west, young man. D, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. The one that's nativist is A. We need help, but if you're Irish, we don't want you here. That's an example of nativism. 3, the Gilded Age of the late 19th century saw the emergence of industrialists who were perceived as ruthless and aggressive. These industrialists were derisively referred to as trustbusters, robber barons, philanthropists, or rogue investors. The best answer is B, robber barons. Okay, remember the Gilded Age is what they call this time period. Lots of growth, tons of growth, but there were problems. Gilded means it looks good on the outside. It has a thin layer of gold on the outside, but the inside is made of cheap material. So it looked great that all this growth was happening, but we had lots of problems. We had tons of problems, especially for immigrants who lived in tenements and had no wages. It was pretty bad for them. Okay, last question. Why is the time period of the 1870s to the turn of the 20th century in the United States referred to as the Gilded Age? Well, I just gave that to you. The answer is C. Although there was much growth, there were many problems facing a growing nation. Okay, fact or crap? A, most European immigrants who came to Angel Island were subject to nativism for taking jobs and low wages. That is a fact. Okay, they were kept there for months sometimes because they were taking all the railroad jobs. Remember, Angel Island is for Asians. B, most Asian immigrants who came through Angel Island worked low-paying jobs because that was better than in their native country. Fact or crap? That is also fact. That is a fact. Even though they had a horrible conditions over here, it was way better than where they were. from? China, Japan, lots of problems like famine, disease, war. So even though they were broke and penniless, it's way better than being dead in their home country. Okay. C, a push factor of immigration is when a person moves to escape something: poverty, crime, persecution, famine. That is also a fact. That is what pushes somebody. They have to go. So that's what a factor of migration is what brings someone to another country. D, a pull factor of migration is one in which a person moves because there's something better in another place. More jobs, more money, less persecution, more food, American dream. That is also a fact. Very good. Okay, they want to come. Okay. Letter E, a monopoly occurs when there are many businesses in a particular industry and competition allows for lower prices and more product choices for consumers. That is crap. Okay, a monopoly is when there's no competition. Okay, and remember, another name for a monopoly is a trust. And so when you hear about antitrust, those are laws designed to get rid of monopolies. Okay, monopolies are horrible. You have no choice, and because you have no choice, you have to pay whatever that person or that business wants for that particular product. Okay. F, Andrew Carnegie was a big businessman in the steel industry. J.P. Morgan was an investor who became rich through many business companies. John D. Rockefeller was the creator of U.S. Steel, and Cornelius Vanderbilt controlled the Standard Oil Company. This is crap for a couple reasons. Okay, this is right. U.S. Steel was Andrew Carnegie's business. J.P. Morgan was in charge of banks, but John D. Rockefeller didn't create U.S. Steel. John D. Rockefeller created a company called Standard Oil. Cornelius Vanderbilt, he was a railroad monopolist. He had nothing to do with Standard Oil. Letter G, the first organized labor union was the Knights of Labor, while the first successful labor union was the AFL, American Federation of Labor. That is a fact. Both of those statements are true. And finally, H, a political machine was created by the U.S. government to help immigrants adjust to life in America. That is crap. It wasn't an actual machine. Remember, it's a group. It's like a gang that helps immigrants, sure, but they do it in a corrupt way. They do favors for immigrants in exchange for votes. And if you remember, the man who was worst at this was a guy named William Boss Tweed. Okay, we're going to take a break now. It's 12 minutes. The next part of the Industrial Revolution will be video 3, and that's going to talk about how we fixed all those problems. This is called the Progressive Era. So come back for another video, please.